The alien girl's cobalt blood pooled around her mangled body as she lay helpless, abandoned by her own kind to die alone on the crippled Binar ship. But the human medic would not let her perish. The battle had been fierce. Commander Thomas Ramos gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white as his ship, the TSS Valiant, took another punishing barrage from the Binar star destroyer Jarak's particle cannons. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles on the bridge. The whole ship shuddered. "Shields at 20%, the tactical officer shouted over the din of klaxons. "We can't take much more of this." Ramos narrowed his eyes at the view screen, where the massive wedge-shaped silhouette of the Binar frigate loomed. He had to act fast. His small Terran ship was outgunned and outmatched against this Binar juggernaut. But Ramos was a veteran, one of the Terran fleet's most brilliant tacticians. He would not go down without a fight. "Helm, bring us about. Get in close, hug their hull," Ramos ordered. "That big bastard can't hit us if we're right under their nose." The pilot swung the Valiant into a tight turn, thrusters flaring. G-forces pressed the crew into their seats as the ship arced onto a new vector, aiming to skim along the Jarak's ventral side. "Give 'em everything we've got, point blank," Ramos commanded. The Valiant's forward batteries opened up, orange lances of plasma streaking across the void, to slam into the Binar ship's hull at nearly touching distance. Ramos watched with grim satisfaction as explosions blossomed along the Jarak's unshielded underside. Escape pods began ejecting from the crippled ship. "She's going critical, Captain," the sensor officer reported. "Reading energy spikes in their reactor core. It's gonna blow." "Back us off," Ramos said. "Get us clear before—" "Sir, I've got a life sign aboard the enemy ship. Someone's still alive over there." Ramos hesitated. "Let the Binar scum burn," part of him said. "They deserved no mercy, and yet—" "Prep my EVA suit," he decided. "I'm going in. No one dies on my watch." Despite the crew's protests, Ramos cycled himself out the Valiant's airlock minutes later. He jetted across the gap to the dying Binar ship, the timer on his HUD counting down to its destruction. He had minutes at most. Ramos carved his way inside with a plasma torch, clambering through the smoking ruin of the enemy vessel. His suit sensors led him to a collapsed section. There, buried in the rubble, lay the broken body of a Binar female. Purple blood leaked from her crushed legs. She looked barely alive. For a moment, Ramos nearly turned away. He almost left her to her fate, this Binar aristocrat, this daughter of an enemy warlord. His ancestors screamed for vengeance. But his medic's oath screamed louder. He would not abandon her. As the ship exploded around them, Ramos gathered the girl into his arms and launched them both back to the Valiant with seconds to spare. "Prep the med bay," he radioed ahead, "and get ready to receive a very special patient." In the Valiant's medical bay, Murlock stirred from her sedated slumber. Her eyes fluttered open, slowly focusing on the unfamiliar surroundings. Sleek, sterile walls and the hum of advanced machinery greeted her senses. She tried to sit up, but a jolt of pain from her mending injuries forced her back down. The hiss of an opening door drew her attention. Commander Ramos strode in, his face an inscrutable mask. Murlock's eyes narrowed. "You," she spat. "Why have you done this? Why save me, your enemy?" Ramos approached her bedside, his jaw set. "It's called basic decency. I couldn't just leave you to die." Murlock scoffed. "Decency? Weakness, more like. You humans are soft. If the roles were reversed, I would have let you burn with my ship." Ramos's fists clenched at his sides, his temper flaring, but he took a steadying breath. "Your ship is gone, destroyed. Your people think you died with it. You're a prisoner of war now, under my authority." Murlock thrashed against her restraints. "I demand you return me to my people at once." "Not going to happen," Ramos said firmly. He gestured to someone out of Murlock's view. "Corporal Mendez here will be overseeing your care and recovery. She'll also be handling your interrogation." A young woman in a crisp white medical uniform stepped into view, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her intelligent eyes assessing Murlock with open curiosity. Greetings, Mendez said. I'm looking forward to learning more about your species' physiology. We've never had the chance to study a live binar before. Murloc recoiled. I am not some specimen for you to experiment on, human. Mendez held up placating hands. Of course not, I only meant... But Murloc wasn't listening. Her mind raced, calculating her next move. These foolish humans thought her helpless, weak. They would soon learn the depths of their mistake. For the next several days, Murloc played the part of the cooperative captive, submitting to Mendez's examinations and Ramos's questioning with feigned resignation. She bided her time, waiting for her wounds to heal and her strength to return. Mendez, for her part, remained endlessly fascinated by Murloc, asking countless questions about binar biology and culture. Despite herself, Murloc found the human's intelligence and genuine interest almost engaging. Almost. Late one night cycle, Murloc made her move. As Mendez leaned in to check her vitals, Murloc surged up from the bed, lashing out with a vicious headbutt. Mendez crumpled to the floor, dazed. In a flash, Murloc was on her, snatching the plasma pistol from Mendez's holster and jamming it under her chin. "Take me to your commander," Murloc growled. "Now!" Mendez, blood trickling from her split lip, had no choice but to comply. She led Murloc at gunpoint through the ship's corridors, the binar's arm locked around her neck. Ramos was in his ready room, poring over star charts, when Murloc kicked in the door. He leapt to his feet, reaching for his own sidearm, but froze when he saw Mendez, pale and trembling in Murloc's grasp. "Surrender your ship," Murloc demanded, "or she dies." Ramos's mind whirled, desperate for a solution. He couldn't let this maniac take the Valiant, but he also couldn't let Mendez die. His eyes darted to the room's vent covers, the glimmer of a plan taking shape. "It's okay," he said slowly, raising his hands. "You win, just don't hurt her." Behind the vent panel, Sergeant Donovan and his Marines waited in tense silence, watching through the grates. On Ramos's signal, they burst from concealment, peppering Murloc with stun rounds. The binar shrieked in rage and pain, her shot going wide as she fell. Mendez dove clear, scrambling to safety. Ramos charged forward, grappling with Murloc for the gun. They crashed against the bulkhead, struggling for control. With a vicious twist, Ramos finally wrenched the pistol from her grasp and cracked the butt across her jaw, sending her sprawling. But not before Murloc managed one last spiteful shot. Donovan howled and fell, clutching his seared and blackened shoulder. Breathing hard, Ramos stood over Murloc's unconscious form, the pistol trained on her head. Every instinct screamed at him to finish it, to end the threat once and for all. "Ramos, don't," Mendez pleaded, staggering to his side. "We need her alive. She might have intel on the binar's plans." Ramos hesitated, finger tense on the trigger. Finally, with a disgusted sigh, he lowered the weapon. "Get her in a cell," he snapped to the Marines. "Maximum security, no more mistakes." As Mendez and the medics rushed to tend to Donovan, Ramos watched Murloc's limp body be dragged away, an uneasy feeling settling in his gut. Somehow he knew this was far from over. The binar prisoner would surely bring more trouble to his ship, but for now the crisis was averted. Ramos would take the win, even if it was a tenuous one. The Valiant's bridge was tense as the distress call from New Dresden crackled over the comms. "Mayday, Mayday. This is New Dresden Colony. We are under heavy attack by binar forces, requesting immediate assistance from any Terran ships in range. They're slaughtering us." Ramos gripped his armrests as he listened, mind racing. The Valiant was the closest vessel, but they were still hours away at maximum burn, and they had a dangerous prisoner aboard. He weighed his options quickly. "Helm, plot a course for New Dresden, best possible speed," Ramos ordered. "Tactical sound battle stations. I want all hands prepped for ground assault." As the bridge crew scrambled to obey, Ramos turned to Mendez. "Get your medics ready and have the prisoner brought to the briefing room. We're going to need her." Minutes later, a shackled Murloc was shoved into the room, flanked by armed Marines. Her eyes glittered with malice as she faced Ramos across the table. "Well, well, to what do I owe this pleasure, Commander?" she purred. Ramos slid a datapad towards her, displaying the schematics of New Dresden's layout. One of our colonies is under Binar attack. You're going to help us stop them. Murloc laughed harshly. And why would I do that? Because if you cooperate, I'll consider letting you go once this is over. Murloc leaned forward, keen interest replacing her scorn. You would set me free? If and only if your intel checks out and we save that colony. Those are my terms. Murloc studied the pad, a slow smile spreading across her face. Oh, I'll help you, human, and you'll come to regret it. The Valiant jolted as it dropped out of warp above New Dresden. Immediately the ship shuddered under a barrage of plasma fire from a Binar dreadnought in low orbit. Evasive maneuvers, get us to the drop point, Ramos shouted. In the hangar bay, Mendez and Sergeant Donovan prepped their gear, checking weapons and sealing their armor. Donovan flexed his newly healed shoulder with a grimace. Hope that patch job of yours holds, Doc. It will, Mendez assured him. You're cleared for full combat duty. Her eyes fell on Murloc, who stood apart from the rest of the Marines, a predatory gleam in her gaze. I've got a bad feeling about bringing her along, Mendez murmured. Orders are orders, Donovan grunted. Just keep your gun on her. First sign of trouble, put her down. The strike team crammed into a drop shuttle, the ship buzzing around them as it dodged enemy fire. With a teeth-rattling jolt, the shuttle punched free of the Valiant and streaked down towards the besieged colony. Anti-aircraft bursts filled the sky as the shuttle weaved and jinked. Murloc, strapped in next to Ramos, bared her teeth in what might have been a grin. Scared, human? Ramos just stared ahead, jaw clenched. Hardly. The shuttle hit the ground hard, ramp slamming down. Go, 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 Donovan roared, and then they were out, charging into the maelstrom of battle. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the colony streets as the Marines clashed with the Binar invaders. Ramos led from the front, his rifle spitting blue-white death. Murloc stayed close, a plasma pistol clutched in her bound hands, picking off targets with vicious accuracy. They fought their way towards the research facility at the heart of the colony, following Murloc's directions. The building had been sacked, bodies of human scientists sprawled in bloody heaps. At the lab's vault, they found a squad of Binars trying to cut through the hardened doors. Ramos and his team fell upon them in a storm of steel and plasma, Murloc a blur of deadly grace in their midst. As the last Binar fell, Murloc rushed to the vault door, keying in a rapid code. The door groaned open, revealing a sleek, cannon-like device within. "What the hell is that?" Donovan demanded. "Fair Planet Killer," Murloc said, almost reverently. "An energy weapon that can shatter worlds." Ramos stepped forward, training his gun on the device. "Why didn't you say the Binars were after something like this?" Murloc turned to face him, a cruel smile playing across her lips. "Oh, did I forget to mention that? How careless of me." A slow clap echoed from the lab's entrance. Ramos spun to see a towering Binar in ornate armor striding towards them, flanked by a score of elite warriors. Murloc stepped forward, arms spread wide in greeting. "Father!" Ramos's eyes widened in horrified realization. "Krelthor," he breathed. "Indeed," the warlord rumbled. "I must thank you, Commander, for delivering my daughter back to me, along with this magnificent weapon. Now kindly drop your arms." Ramos glanced at Murloc, saw the triumphant gloating in her eyes, and knew he had been betrayed. Snarling a curse, he swung his rifle towards her, but Krelthor was faster. A blast of plasma slammed into Ramos's chest, sending him crashing to the floor in a clatter of armor. His Marines shouted in alarm, bringing their guns to bear, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. "Take them," Krelthor commanded with a dismissive wave. Binar soldiers surged forward, swiftly disarming and subduing the humans. Mendez cried out as she was wrenched to her knees, a plasma pistol pressed to her temple. Murloc stood over Ramos's crumpled form, savoring her victory. "I told you you'd regret setting me free," she gloated. Krelthor loomed over them, his voice a dark rumble. "You have cost me much, human, but your suffering has only begun. When I unleash this power upon your worlds, all will know the price of defying the Bynnar Empire." Ramos, fighting to remain conscious, could only watch helplessly as Krelthor turned towards the planet killer, while Murloc looked on in dark satisfaction. The warlord's hand closed around the weapon's activation lever. Krelthor's hand closed around the weapon's activation lever, a cruel smile twisting his features. Ramos struggled against the Bynars holding him down, feeling the cold press of a gun barrel against his skull. This was it. He had failed. Suddenly a hissing sound filled the air. The Bynars stiffened, then crumpled to the floor, spasming. Ramos stared in shock as Mendez burst into the room, a canister in his hand. "Potent neurotoxin," Mendez explained breathlessly, tossing Ramos a plasma rifle. "Bynnar physiology can't handle it. Hurry!" Ramos snatched up the gun and fired, dropping the Bynars guarding his team. They armed themselves from the fallen enemy, grim determination etched on their faces. "We need to stop that weapon," Ramos growled. They charged into the command center, guns blazing. Bynars fell before their onslaught, but more rushed to replace them. Ramos and Donovan fought like men possessed, plasma bolts searing the air. In the chaos, no one noticed Murloc. She watched her father, saw the madness in his eyes as he prepared to unleash genocide. In that moment, doubt crept into her heart. Was this truly the Bynnar way? Slaughtering the innocent, betraying their honor? She made her choice. Murloc lunged for the weapon's control panel, desperate to abort the firing sequence. Krelthor roared in rage, backhanding her viciously. She crashed to the floor, purple blood spraying from her lips. "Traitorous whelp," Krelthor snarled. "I will destroy you along with these human filth." Ramos saw Murloc fall, saw Krelthor turn back to the weapon. Time seemed to slow. He had a split second to decide, save Murloc or stop Krelthor. With a bellow of pure fury, Ramos charged. He crashed into Krelthor, sending them both tumbling. They grappled savagely, trading blows that cracked bone. Krelthor was stronger, but Ramos was faster. He drove a knee into the warlord's gut, then wrenched the ceremonial blade from Krelthor's belt. The two leaders circled each other, panting, bleeding. Krelthor lunged, stabbing with a hidden dagger. Ramos parried, but the blade slipped past his guard, plunging into his side. Agony seared through him, but he pushed through it. With a final, desperate thrust, Ramos buried his stolen knife to the hilt in Krelthor's chest. The warlord staggered back, shock etched on his face. He toppled, hand still outstretched towards the weapon. Ramos stumbled to the control panel, vision blurring, and slammed the abort command. Silence fell over the command center. It was over. Ramos collapsed next to Murloc, both of them bleeding, broken. She reached for him with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong, my father, what we did, it was wrong." Ramos coughed, tasting blood. "Help me end this war, Murloc. No one else needs to die. Not Bynnar, not human, no one." Murloc nodded weakly, tears cutting through the grime on her face. "I will, I swear it. We'll forge a new path together." Darkness crept in at the edges of Ramos's vision. The last thing he heard before unconsciousness claimed him was Mendez, shouting for a medic. There was still hope, Ramos thought dimly. Hope for peace. Hope for a future. And then he knew no more. Mendez and the strike team burst into the command center, plasma rifles raised. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene of carnage. Krelthor lay dead in a spreading pool of purple blood. The prototype weapon sparked and smoked, its control panel a melted ruin. And there, sprawled amidst the wreckage, was Ramos. Murloc knelt over him, her hands pressed to the gaping wound in his side. "Commander!" Mendez rushed forward, medkit in hand. He dropped to his knees beside Ramos, scanning his vitals with a trembling hand. "Stay with me, sir. You're going to be okay." Ramos coughed, flecks of blood spattering his lips. "Mendez, is the weapon, did we—" "It's done, sir. You stopped it. You saved everyone." Ramos nodded weakly, his eyes fluttering shut. Mendez cursed, ripping open his medkit. He worked feverishly, applying pressure bandages, injecting coagulants and painkillers. But the wound was severe, the damage extensive. Ramos needed more than battlefield first aid. Murlock watched Mendez work, her face etched with guilt and sorrow. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I brought this upon you, upon all of you." Mendez glanced up at her, his expression hard. "Help me save him, and maybe you can start making amends." Murlock nodded, jaw set with determination. "I will do whatever it takes, you have my word." Together they stabilized Ramos as best they could. Mendez called for an immediate evac, his voice cracking with urgency. "We need to get him to a proper medical facility fast. He's not going to make it otherwise." As the strike team secured the command center, Murlock pulled Mendez aside. "My people will never accept me now," she said quietly. "I have betrayed everything they stand for, everything I was raised to believe." She met his gaze, her eyes pleading. "Let me help you escape this planet. Grant me asylum among your people, and I will give you whatever knowledge I have to end this war." Mendez hesitated, torn. Could they really trust her after everything she'd done? But the sincerity in her voice, the pain in her eyes, he believed her. "Okay," he agreed. "Okay. Help us get out of here, and I'll make sure you're treated fairly." Murlock sagged with relief. "Thank you," she breathed. They loaded Ramos onto a stretcher, handling him with infinite care. He drifted in and out of consciousness, face ashen, breath labored, but as they prepared to move out, his eyes snapped open. "No," he rasped. "No, I have to lead the evacuation." Mendez shook his head. "Sir, you're in no condition—" "Mendez." Ramos gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Please, I need to do this. I need to see it through." Mendez clenched his jaw, but he understood. He knew he would feel the same in Ramos's place. "Okay, Commander, we'll follow your lead." With Murlock guiding them through the chaos of the battle-torn facility, they made their way to the landing bay. Binar soldiers tried to block their path, but the strike team cut them down with ruthless efficiency. They piled into a commandeered Binar transport ship, Ramos strapped securely to a medbed in the rear compartment. Mendez took the pilot's seat, hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. Murlock strapped in beside him, pointing out key systems. The ship lurched into the air, thrusters roaring. Plasma fire streaked past the viewports as they blasted free of the facility, Binar fighters swooping in to pursue. Mendez pushed the engines to full throttle, the ship shuddering around them. The inertial dampeners struggled to compensate as they careened through the atmosphere, the hull groaning under the strain. Murlock worked the weapons console, returning fire as best she could. They burst from the clouds, New Dresden's orbit yawning before them. For a moment Mendez dared to hope they might make a clean getaway. Then the sensors screamed a proximity alert, and his blood ran cold. A massive Binar battleship loomed ahead, dwarfing their tiny transport. Its hull bristled with cannon batteries, its shadow falling over them like a shroud. A hailing frequency crackled to life, and a harsh voice filled the cockpit. "This is Admiral Jarlock of the Binar Supremacy," the voice snarled. "Murlock, you traitorous filth, surrender at once or be obliterated." Murlock paled, her hands trembling on the console. "Jarlock," she whispered. "My father's second in command. He'll never let us go. Not now." Mendez swallowed hard, mind racing. What could they do? They were outgunned, outclassed in every way. There was no way they could outfight that monster. But maybe... A hand fell on his shoulder, startling him. He turned to see Ramos standing there, face drawn and haggard, barely keeping his feet. But his eyes blazed with determination. "Get the others to the escape pods," Ramos ordered, his voice rasping but strong. "Evacuate, now." "Sir?" Mendez gaped at him. "What about you?" "Murlock and I will stay behind. Buy you some time." "Commander, no, you can't." "Mendez." Ramos squeezed his shoulder. "Please, I need you to live, to tell our story. Can you do that for me?" Tears blurred Mendez's vision, but he nodded. "Yes, sir," he choked out. "It's been an honor, Commander." The honor was mine, Mendez. Now go, go. Mendez gathered the strike team, herding them towards the escape pods. They balked, protesting, but he overrode them. The commander gave us an order. Move it, people. He paused in the doorway, looking back one last time. Ramos and Murloc hunched over the weapons console, the prototype cannon from the facility connected to the ship's power systems with hastily spliced cables. They looked up, meeting his gaze. Ramos nodded, a silent farewell. Murloc mouthed a thank you. Then Mendez was sealing the hatch, piling into an escape pod with the others. The pod blasted free, rocketing away from the doomed transport ship. Through the viewport, Mendez saw the transport accelerate towards the looming battleship, weapon ports flaring with energy. Lances of incandescent light erupted from the transport, slamming into the battleship's hull. Explosions bloomed across its armored surface, the prototype cannon tearing through its defenses with devastating power. The battleship reeled, listing drunkenly, secondary detonations ripping through its superstructure. But it wasn't dead yet. Its own weapons charged, unleashing a blistering salvo. The transport's shields flared, held for a moment, then collapsed. Beams of searing energy sliced into the smaller ship, shearing off wings, breaching the hull. Atmosphere vented in streaming plumes, the transport beginning to break apart. And still it kept firing, pouring everything it had into the maimed battleship. The Binar vessel shuddered, explosions racking its frame. Then, with a final titanic blast, its reactor went critical. The battleship vanished in a blinding fireball, the shockwave buffeting the escape pod. Mendez stared at the expanding field of debris, numb with shock and grief. The transport was gone, reduced to glittering fragments. Ramos? Murloc? A sob tore from his throat. He sagged back in his seat, letting the tears come. The others wept openly, uncaring of rank or protocol. They had won. They had survived. But the cost had been so high. The escape pod drifted, beacon pinging, awaiting pickup. Mendez closed his eyes, seeing Ramos's face, hearing his final order. "Live," he had said. "Tell our story." Mendez clenched his fists, grief hardening into resolve. He swore it on his commander's memory, on the blood they had shed, the friends they had lost. He would live, he would fight, and he would never, never forget. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.